year for the Portland Children's Levy Allocation Committee. I'm County Chair Marisa Madrigal, and I'm filling in for Allocation Chair Dan Saltzman. I'd like to introduce my fellow committee members. On my far left is Serena Stoudemire-Wesley, the citizen rep from Multnomah County. On my right is Julie S. Young, the City of Portland appointed rep. And on my far right is Mitch Horniker, representing the Portland Business Alliance. Now I'll introduce the Portland Children's Levy staff, Director Lisa Pellegrino, who oversees the current after-school and upcoming hunger relief investments, Lisa Hansel, who supervises the foster care and child abuse prevention and intervention investments, Communications Director Mary Gay Broderick, and Fiscal Specialist John Kelly, Assistant Director Meg McElroy, who is in charge of the early childhood and mentoring investments, couldn't be with us today. I'll give a brief recap of the Portland Children's Levy history before we get to our agenda. The levy was created by Portland voters in 2002 and overwhelmingly renewed in 2008, and again in the spring of 2013. The levy annually supports $10 million worth of investments through programs in early childhood, after school and mentoring, child abuse prevention and intervention, and helping children in foster care succeed. Beginning in July, we will begin funding hunger relief. The levy operates with a 5% administrative rate, is annually audited by an outside independent firm, and reaches about 10,000 children and families each year. The first item up today is approving the minutes of our December 16th meeting. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Mitch Horniker moves, and Serena Stoudemire-Wesley seconds approval of the minutes for December 16th. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? The minutes are approved. Next, we'll open up the floor to public comment. This is the time set aside for anyone who wishes to speak about general levy topics. We have time later for audience members to comment on the request for investment templates in each of the program areas. Would anyone like to testify? Come on up.
Hi, I'm Kelly Hansen. I'm a program manager at the Community Cycling Center. I wanted to respond to last meeting's staff recommendations about excluding for-profit entities from being eligible for the PCL funds. We want to agree with the staff recommendation and with Ms. Madrigal's recommendation that for-profit entities be excluded. As nonprofit entities, we all are accountable to our mission and we exist for our mission, whereas for-profit entities are accountable to their bottom line. And while we agree with the committee that a robust applicant pool is best for everyone, it's important to us that there isn't a conflict between executing mission and reaching a bottom line that could hurt the overall progress of the PCL. So we know that this has already been voted on, but we hope that the committee will keep that in mind, that conflict in mind, as they make decisions about the applications. Thank you.
Would anyone else like to make general comments? Once? Twice? Okay. Our next topic centers around a financial update and a revenue forecast for the first 3 years of the new levy beginning in July. John and Lisa will walk us through the numbers, and then we will be asked to vote on investment amounts in each of the program areas for that 3-year period.
Good afternoon. So this Monday past, the city economist Josh Harwood gave us his latest projections for revenues for the new year, the new fiscal year, which starts in July. And then the first 3 years is what we're going to present today, as Chair Madrigal said. So big charts with lots of big numbers, and we're happy how big they are. Things look good. So that top line says projected total revenue. Those are the numbers directly from the city economist. And as you can see, there are 4 columns, one for each of the first 3 years of the levy, and then a total on the right. So we expect about 10.5 million total revenue next year, 11.2 the year after that, and about 12 million in the third year. Going down to the next line, you see the projected grant funds available, and all we do there is take 95% of those top line dollars and that's what's available for grants. We have, as was mentioned earlier, the 5% administrative cap, so that's taking aside the 5% to spend on administration of the fund, so that leaves us with about $32 million. And you can see how it goes in each year there. The third line is fund balance. So we have, when revenue projections are less than actuals, which is what happened this year, we're left with fund balance. Or if there's underspending on grants, there's a variety of factors that can lead to fund balance. And we currently have a healthy fund balance. We'd like to keep some in reserve, but we are proposing that $760,000 of that fund balance be applied to the grants for the next 3 years. And so then you get down to that bottom line, total projected grant funds available per year, about 10.6, 10.8, and 11.4, coming out at $32.9 million for 3 years. The way they come in is shown there, but they don't have to go out exactly that way because of the fund balance. We can do some smoothing, and applying that fund balance helps it to be a more even, as you can see that the numbers be more even. So now we'll go on to how these are going to be allocated or could be allocated. This is the decision before us today. So you can see each of the program areas is there in the first column with a total at the bottom. The second column, percentage allocated to program area, those are the decisions that you made last month or November, I think it was November, how to divide the new funds among the program areas, among the 6 program areas. So if we apply that, okay, we go to the next column, grant funds available 3-year total, that bottom number, 32.9, the total, is then multiplied by those percentages to get the allocation, the 3-year allocation per area. And that's the number that would appear in the request for investment. It would, in the early childhood request for investment, it would say there are approximately this many dollars available, and that's what folks are applying for. The last 2 columns are sort of for comparison. Second to last, the annual average of grant funds available. That's just taking that 3-year number, dividing it by 3, and showing what is available per year. So that number is 10.9. The total on that number is 10.9 million. And I believe, I looked at the minutes from October, we thought that would be 10.5. So the latest projections are even better. Yeah, it's good news. And city economist feels that he's been conservative even in projecting out those 3 years. There's a lot of unknowns. The compression is a strange phenomenon. It's notoriously hard to predict exactly how it's going to fall out. So his best numbers are there. And that final column, the fiscal year 2014 grants, that's the year we're in. That's the money that's already granted out and is being spent these days. And that is a total of only 8.1. Now you can look at each of the program area lines and see that in every single one, when you compare the annual average to the fiscal year 2014 grants, there's an increase. So we're happy to report that there won't need to be cuts. There will be increases in every program area, or that's available. That's for you all to decide, of course, but that money is available. Anything to add?
No, just, are there any questions? We want to make sure it's clear, because what we'd be voting on essentially is that's it's that second column up there, and on your sheet I think it's the same, that's saying that these are the 3-year grant amounts that we would put into the RFIs, because that we put the numbers in there. We tell people how much is available over 3 years, and then we'll divide it up by the strategies as well, since we portion those out by percentage. So we just want to make sure everybody understands where we got the numbers, and that everyone's okay with that. And make sure that you're okay with applying the fund balance, because that's a decision to make.
Any questions? Comments? Okay, just a procedural check. Does this need a motion and a second, and then?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Yes, just make sure you voted on it.
So,
I'll put forth a motion that we accept it as been given to us.
great. Can I have a second? Second. Great. Okay, so Serena moves and Julie seconds a vote to approve the allocation of funds to each program area. All in favor vote aye.
Aye.
Opposed? They are adopted.
Okay.
Great, thank you.
The numbers will go in the next round of RFIs for next week. Okay, so I guess Lisa and I are going to walk you through all of the customizations, if you will, to each of the RFIs so that they would apply to the program areas. And make sure, I think what we'll do in terms of procedure, just so it's clear to the audience, is that we will walk you through the proposed changes for a specific RFI, and we'll take any questions you all have, if you have any discussions or anything you want to air first, and then we'll allow, if anybody wants to get up from the public to make any comments or advice to you about whether to accept those changes, do different changes, whatever they want to say. And then there could be further discussion, and then any modifications that you want or whatever we want to do, go from there and vote on it so that we can carry, I mean, we're set to publish on Thursday, so we're looking for your final approval, and if you have specific directions to change this, don't do this, whatever, we want to make sure we get all those down, and that we get them specifically for each RFI. So I think it doesn't make sense to try to do them all together. I think we've got to do them piece by piece. So first, let me just run through what, we did make some changes to sort of the template, if you will, or the, to all of the RFIs. Most of those changes are, we added specific information for each program area. So that's the bulk of the changes around research, local data, and the public input. So that stuff was all put in as they applied to each program area. We also defined key terms in the strategy. So, we wrote those strategies. We all have kind of a common understanding of what some of those terms might mean. But we felt it would probably be better to further define some of those terms, things like intensive, and we'll go through what we define those as. The other key piece that we wanted to make sure, because we started to get questions about this, people were calling and asking about whether our priorities as they were listed in those strategies were requirements. So in other words, if they had a program that did not address one of the priorities that was stated in the strategy, could they still apply? And we put language in all of the RFIs making clear that yes, you can still apply even if your program does not address the specific priority. So if the priority is East Portland, for that strategy, but you have a program in North Portland, can you still apply? Yes. The idea of priorities is that we'll be evaluating the total investment pool to understand how well we addressed our priorities once you guys come to some preliminary decisions in the meetings. So that's how we'll use the priorities, and we want to make sure that everybody understood that, and we want to say it here and write it down and say it again so that people understand that they're not prohibited from applying. The other piece is that the other thing we've got some questions about is if there's a group or a collaboration of folks that want to apply, how could they do that? And we just wanted to make clear that it's perfectly fine to do that, but we do need a lead agency. That's kind of the structure that we have to use legally in order to be able to contract with people. So they can all collaborate, that's fine, but they just need to work out amongst themselves who will be their lead, and then they have to set up their subcontracts. And the lead is responsible for the invoicing, the billing, and the reporting. So their name is kind of on the dotted line there. I want to make sure people understand that. So that was added to all RFIs. I didn't think they would be particularly controversial, so I don't know if we need to take testimony on that, but is there any questions or discussion or issues that people would have with any of those things? Or?
Nope.
No? Okay. All right, why don't we move on then, and we'll go to the first one. I thought we'd do after school first, since I'm talking already. I'll just keep talking for a few more minutes and go through what the changes. We're sort of going from least amount of change to most amount of change in our discussion today. So just to review the strategies that we voted on in after school, that all the programs have to address at least one of these strategies, is intensive academic supports, enrichment programming, and new Sun community school programs. So the changes that we made for after school was first to add some definitions. And so the most kind of key definition that we added was around what is an intensive academic support. And we defined that as offering at least 60 hours per school year of academically focused supports, and then gave some examples of what academically focused supports might be.
What page?
Which page of the RFI? Oh my.
20, page 5.
Thank you. Because I was going to say, I don't have the page numbers keyed, Serena. I have my notes here. Okay. Thank you. Yes, Mary Gay and John, I'll ask you to follow along with this set in case people have other questions about page numbers. So that's the first change that we made, was to define that, and that comes from research and also from looking at sort of our experience over the last 10 years of funding intensive academic supports. That most folks who are doing that and are tracking academic variables are offering at least that much service, if not more, and some are offering more, quite a bit more actually. Second, we included language on how to deal with applicants that are proposing multiple strategies. So this is something that has come up. Other people have also called with questions about this. There may be an application that, for instance, in this arena, comes forward with program elements around intensive academic supports, but also wants to offer enrichment programming. And they want to know they have to write 2 applications. And we wanted to try to avoid that if possible. More paper, more work for everybody, and said that yes, you can apply for multiple strategies. You have to make that clear, and you have to estimate your budget portions going to each strategy. So there's a few conditions on that. In the case of after school, we wanted to make clear that within the categories that we have within the different strategies, the folks will be competing against each other for the dollars that we've allocated to those strategies, if that makes sense. This is hard to explain in the abstract, but it'll make more sense in the reality. For the intensive academic supports, if we've got applications that are proposing both enrichment and academic supports, we'll make the decisions. Everyone who's applying for academic supports will be competing against each other. You all will decide whether you want to fund the enrichment supports that are parts of those applications or not, but we'll make those decisions first, and then move to enrichment programming. Those folks will compete against each other, minus whatever dollars you allocated to enrichment programming that was sort of appurtenant to the intensive academic supports. And the reason for this is kind of preserving something we did last time. You folks all weren't, mostly I'm looking at everybody's new, weren't around last time, but it's the size of the organizations that typically offer enrichment programming are often, the ones who do those alone are often quite small, and it was kind of unfair and difficult for them to compete against organizations that were large and offered, had much greater breadth of experience and offerings than what single purpose enrichment programs offered. And so we separated those two last time, and the larger full service programs compete against each other, and the smaller enrichment programs compete against each other. So we've sort of just preserved that, basically, making allowance for this multiple strategy thing. So it's kind of a technical thing. The other thing is the Sun Community School programs, again, will compete for those dollars that were set aside for them in their category as well. So you'll make sort of a series of decisions in that meeting with pools of applications looking at the general totals that you wanted to apply to each strategy. So it's just trying to make that clear, and that's
Question,
what the...
question. So it sounds like this is not necessarily a change on how allocations were made last time, but the RFI, in the last round, didn't have this expressed in it.
It did. It was just categorized differently because we didn't use strategies, if that makes sense. And so it was just a different. You could apply. There were similar overlaps, but we defined things differently. Right. So when you have strategies and we've put money toward each strategy, there has to be a way to kind of keep track of that in the applications. Otherwise, you can't apportion the money easily. So we're just trying to make it so you can hopefully do that and it won't be too hard. Okay. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay. Any other questions about that? I know it's kind of confusing in the abstract. No? Okay. The other thing was we clarified the match requirement for New Sun schools, which is what you all voted on. We just spelled it out and added that language. And last, we required different enclosures. So we asked people, whenever we have a match requirement, which we had in our leverage fund grants last time, you have to submit letters of commitment from your match sources, basically. So we require that. And also, you have to, if you're proposing to do a New Sun site, we want to make sure the principal is on board and knows that you're making the application. So that would be, we want to make a letter from the principal saying, yes, I'm aware this is going forward, I'm in favor of it, et cetera, and we're ready for the following reasons. And then last, for anybody who wants to deliver a program at a school, so there are enrichment programs that say, I want to go deliver my program at the following schools. We want to make sure they've checked with those schools, and we want to understand, is it complementary to what is already being offered? So we ask that they go talk and they get a letter from that school. So it just provides basic protection that they have had those conversations ahead of time. So those are the different enclosures that are required for after-school programs. So that is that on after-school programs. Is there any questions from you all about those? Further questions or discussion before we ask if anybody has comment or? No? Okay. All right, now you get to
Okay.
ask the folks if they want to say anything.
Is there anyone who would like to give public comment on this particular RFI, the after school? And if you could maybe do a show of hands, we can see how many there are. None. Okay. Well,
Moving right along.
that's it. If there's no public comment, do you want us to wait until the end and then vote through each in sequence
Vote
or?
no, I think.
Just vote
unless-
now?
Unless you have an objection to it. I mean, it doesn't matter to me that much, but it just seems easier, then we won't forget.
Just get them out of the way. Okay, great. May I get a motion?
Sure. I move that we adopt the RFI as presented by the staff in the area of after-school programs.
Second.
Okay. There's been a motion and a second to approve the RFI for after school. All in favor, vote aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The RFI for after school is approved. The next one we'll do is early childhood.
In this funding area, we have 3 strategies: intensive home visiting, preschool Head Start or preschool-like experiences, and early childhood mental health. This is another area where we made very few changes to the RFI template. We did provide definitions to clarify terms that are used to describe the early childhood strategies. Again, I'm not going to go through and share each of those definitions of terms, but did want to highlight the term intensive. It's also used in this program area for the home visiting strategy, and it's a requirement for the home visiting strategy, and is defined as at least 1 hour provided, 1 hour visits provided weekly or twice monthly, and offered to families for at least a year, preferably multiple years per child. The other change that we made was providing language related to programs proposing to address multiple strategies in this program area. It's allowable, and programs need to estimate what percentage of the budget would be for each of the strategies that they're proposing. In this funding area, all the applications would be competing against each other, not separating them out as in after school. Those are really the only changes that apply in the early childhood area.
Any questions?
I have one.
Serena?
How is the tracking going to be done on the hourly? Are you going to check with them just yearly, or is it going to be during the yearly audit to make sure that these home visits are happening? Like at least the 1 hour, or?
In the reporting that we have, all the programs report on participation and also the service delivery. And so the monitoring is done annually for the service delivery. Is there anything to add?
No, I mean, it's just part of our normal track. I mean, in other words, you just haven't seen the reports that we'll give you.
Right.
You'll see them shortly. They'll be coming shortly, so you'll see when you want to understand what do people do over time. We provide all that data. They provide it to us. We provide it to you.
Other questions? Okay. If
I
there's
guess we won't move until you
won't
ask.
until people
Which is not to mean you should not.
So with that, we move to public comment.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. Is there anyone who would like to comment on the RFI for early childhood? No? Okay. Seeing none, can I get a motion to approve the early childhood RFI?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. The approval of the early childhood RFI has been moved and seconded. All in favor, vote aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The early childhood RFI is approved. And now we are on to child abuse prevention and intervention.
continue talking. In this program area, we have 2 strategies: strengthening parenting skills and resilience, and addressing trauma through therapeutic intervention. This is another one where we've only made a couple of changes to the RFI template. We've, again, provided definitions of terms included in the child abuse prevention and intervention strategies to help clarify what is meant. And this time, I'm going to also explain what intensive means in this program area, and it's associated with the parenting strategy. And instead of being a requirement, it's a priority, and is defined as a minimum of 25 to 40 contact hours per parent or family, with a minimum of 12 sessions. For home visiting services, visits of at least 1 hour need to occur weekly or twice monthly and be offered to families for at least 1 year. For programs that last for at least 6 to 8 months, regular contact at least 4 times per week via classes, home visits, and telephone calls. And this is included as a priority in this for this strategy instead of a requirement, as was in the early childhood home visiting, because there's not a standard for duration and intensity in parent education programs. However, research does show that longer and more intensive programs are generally more successful than shorter term, less intense programs. The other thing that was changed here was the language related to those proposing to address multiple strategies, and it's the same as in the early childhood.
Any questions? No? Okay. Anything further from you? No? Okay. Any public comment on the RFI for child abuse prevention and intervention? Okay, we are moving quickly today.
Oh,
Wow.
Please, no one
Guys
has
did a
nothing to
great
say.
job.
I'll try to take that as a compliment. Okay. Actually, Lisa's going to do that.
Okay, I have one more. Next is foster care.
Do we want to vote on the
I'm sorry.
child abuse?
Right. Vote yes, please. I'm glad you're keeping track.
Can I get a motion to approve the child abuse prevention and intervention RFI?
So moved.
Thank you. Second. Okay. Approval of child abuse prevention and intervention RFI has been moved and seconded. All in favor vote aye. Aye. Opposed? The RFI is approved. And now foster care.
Okay, now foster care. There are 3 strategies in this program area: intensive academic support and educational advocacy, early childhood through college, support for youth in transition to adulthood, and permanency for youth. There were more changes in this program area. As with the others, we've provided definitions for terms included in the foster care strategies. Again, I want to highlight intensive, and in this case is required for the academic support strategy, but it's not defined because of the wide range of programs and types of services that may be proposed due to the wide age range that is included in the strategy. But we will be asking applicants to demonstrate that the level of service intensity proposed is indeed intense for the population that's being served. Like early childhood and child abuse prevention, we've provided the language around how to address multiple strategies. In the funding requirements section, we've expanded the definition regarding residency eligibility to include either the residence of the birth parents or the foster parents, so that a youth would meet eligibility requirements if either live in the city limits. We've also expanded the age range of eligible service population to age 24, where the maximum age in any of the other categories is 18 or obviously younger for early childhood. And this is to assure that youth aging out of foster care have continued support as they transition into adulthood. We've also defined foster care in the funding requirements section, and that's to clarify that we're referring to formal foster care versus informal foster care. The last time that we issued this RFI, there was some confusion around what was meant by foster care. So we are defining that this time around. At the time of enrollment, children and youth need to be either in foster care or aged out of foster care to be eligible for any of the services under the 3 strategies. And foster care is defined as children and youth who are placed by the Oregon Department of Human Services or a tribal organization in a relative or non-relative foster home, group home, emergency shelter, residential facility, or pre-adoptive home. We're also requiring an additional enclosure for this funding area or program area, a statement of working relationship with DHS Child Welfare. And that's because it's very important for programs to have an established working relationship with DHS Child Welfare. The last time around, we did ask questions in the RFI to try to get at what that working relationship was, and got a variety of kinds of responses, but we didn't have a way to systematically have DHS review that and provide comment or additional information about the working relationship. So this time, we've, in coordination with DHS, have created a form where the applicant will describe their working relationship, how the services that they're proposing enhance or complement the services provided by DHS, and then also asking about any contracts that the applicant organization has with DHS to provide services in the past 3 years. And then when we get those forms back, the forms will be turned in with the application, and then when we get those forms back, staff will send those all to DHS for review and any further comment. And then that information will not be scored. However, staff will include it in our summaries that you all receive as additional information as appropriate. And then the last thing in this area that was changed is we will be asking for additional information regarding referrals. We're not specifically asking about referrals, referral sources in the template RFI, but in this case, most of the programs will be receiving their referrals from DHS, not all, but most. And in those, we want to understand if the referral process is already set up, because if not, it'll likely take considerable time and effort to get that in place and up and running. And so for the programs that get referrals from sources other than DHS, we want to understand how they communicate and coordinate with DHS on a regular basis. So those are the changes to the template in this funding area. Questions?
Question? Is there anyone here who would like to comment on the foster care RFI? Come on.
Good afternoon. I'm Mark McKechnie, Executive Director of Youth Rights and Justice, and I have a couple of comments on the eligibility for foster care. And these are ongoing discussions that we've had with Lisa. So these are based on our experience trying to figure out which children qualify and which do not. So I have a couple of specific recommendations for modifications. One is that I think you've done a very good job of a pretty expansive definition in some ways of who could be eligible. And in fact, youth who age out of foster care could be served for up to 3 years after they leave foster care because the age is 24 and they have to leave foster care at age 21. But there's another group who leave foster care before they become adults who are also vulnerable and are referred to our program because of those needs. And they include children going directly from foster care into adoption, going directly from foster care into a juvenile court guardianship, and children returning home to their parents. And we found it's not a huge number of cases, but because of the educational needs that occur specifically at times of transition where children are having to change schools because they're moving in with a caregiver who lives in a different district than they were before, and then having to work with an entirely new school team who may need to understand and meet a myriad of the child's special needs, that is a critical time for educational advocacy. So we would ask that the definition of foster care be expanded slightly to include children who have left foster care within the last 12 months. And that would encompass, I think, all of those kind of exceptional circumstances, but certainly children and families who need the same kind of support as children in foster care. And then I think that also gets to one of the ongoing conversations we've had in this process is about the difference between a child being a ward of the court and a child being in the custody of DHS. And because we deal with the legal system, we view children as whether they're wards of the court or not, and they can actually be in the custody of several different agencies. And by narrowing the definition in this cycle to DHS or a tribal agency, my understanding would be that we're excluding children who are in Oregon Youth Authority foster placements, in placements by the County Juvenile Department that are substitute care placements, And in fact, our juvenile department just became the first to qualify for federal 4E foster care funds to pay for its placement. So I think this would be inconsistent with that change, treating those as if they're not in foster care when we went through a process to make them eligible for foster care payments. And then we've also found, because we specialize in this particular type of case, there is a special immigrant juvenile status that can be gained for undocumented children who are trafficked or who are abandoned by their parents or can't return to their country of origin because their life would be in danger. And based on certain findings that are made in the juvenile court, they can become wards of the court here and then become eligible to apply for permanent residency and potentially citizenship. And there is actually a federal foster care system. It's small and not very well known, but it exists, and we've had our clients placed through that system as well. So I would, rather than basing the physical custody of the child on DHS custody or a tribal agency custody, I would say if the child is a ward of the juvenile court or the tribal court, and that would be more expansive to include those other less common but important populations of children who are wards of the court and in some type of foster care type placement.
Thank you. Thank you. Could staff address a couple of those things? Any other folks who want to give comments? Okay. Thank you.
Yes. The situations that Mark has shared, they were situations that have come up only in the case of the program that, the School Works program. And those were, Mark, correct me if I'm wrong, but probably about 10 cases over the past 5 years, roughly. And in those cases that have come up, I have, for the most part, granted exceptions to them because they were clearly not, the children were not placed in their home, and it made sense that they would be seen or considered by the general population as in foster care or not placed with their birth family. In this definition, I'm certainly open to changing the wording. However, the reason that staff has suggested this wording really is that by and large, it's, this is the definition that has been used for the past 5 years and has not been a problem or an issue other than in the exceptions that have needed to be made for the School Works program. The intent of the language in the levy really seems to be helping children in foster care succeed. And in foster care, my understanding of the intent was that it was children who are in DHS foster care, meaning that they're in subcare, they're placed in a foster care home, a relative or non-relative, or another type of residential facility that is overseen by DHS or tribal organizations. So that's the reason for the, I guess there's a couple other things too, is that the need really is great enough for serving children who are in the standard foster care system that the general public, I believe, thinks about. We're not at a shortage of being able to serve, we're not having empty spaces, programs not being able to fill those because there aren't enough children in foster care. This is the same reason that we didn't expand the definition to include family or children who are in homes other than their biological homes, but DHS isn't involved. Sometimes children are living with friends or family, but DHS isn't involved. We haven't expanded to include informal foster care in this either because we're not meeting the needs of the children who are in foster care. And one thing that I do want to make sure is clear is that the eligibility requirement is at the time of enrollment. So if a child is in foster care when they enroll in program services and then they're reunified with their family, we don't expect that services stop. Services can continue to be provided to that child while they're back with their birth family, as long as it's appropriate to continue to receive those services. So it's not like, once the child is reunified with the family that they need to go, that they can no longer receive services. So do you have additional questions about that, or I don't know if Mark has additional comments as well.
Thank you. Can you talk a little bit about, that's the first time I've heard about grant by exception, so can you explain a little bit about how that works?
Well, and like I said, very few cases, but when there's a child that is in a situation, I mean, Mark may be able to discuss this better, but one of those situations where the child is a ward of a court.
No, I don't mean
Is that what you
what are
mean?
the facts that led to the exception, but the fact that we can grant an exception to our guidelines and still fund a program.
It's about, you have to remember, it's about counting. Okay, so this comes up in the arena of counting. So people have to, they set a goal for how much they're going to, so they write an application that they want to serve 50 foster youth over the course of the year. We ask them to report how many youth they are serving. So they come and say, well, I'm serving 45 youth that are in DH custody, and I've got 5 youth who are in somebody else's custody, but who are in sub-care, which has been kind of the key piece with sub-care. And so Lisa allowed them to count kids who are in a different kind of sub-care, a slightly different and unusual, and as she said, only has come up in this particular
Handful.
circumstance.
Over
A handful of over 5 years. To say, yes, it follows the intent. They're in sub-care. They're not placed with their family. You can count those as part of the service for this program that you're providing with our money. So it comes up in that context. Does that make sense? So the bulk of the program is serving the kids who are meeting the definition that was, again, in the last RFI, there wasn't the definition, and then we discovered this problem afterwards. So we were trying to kind of get ahead of the curve and at least define better. I think would be fine if you wanted to include kids in other types of, in specialized types of other sub-care potentially. That's different than extending the definition 12 months after. I mean, that's a different thing. I would, those are two different issues, I guess. So you want to be clear on what you want to allow and why.
And it's my understanding that if a child has been in the care, it does continue, as you were saying. If they were receiving services, their services don't stop. They're still getting the care.
Correct. If they met the eligibility requirement at the time that they were enrolled in the services.
They're still getting the care. And then if there is a question, and you're allowing it, if there's a question on whether a kid can be served, as long as they call in and make sure that you all are okay with it, then it's still okay. So even if we don't change, we decide not to change, but keep it as is, if a problem comes up, that kid can still get service as long as they've been serving other kids. I guess that's what my question is. It's kind of crazy, but.
Well, there's also the issue that, remember, we are not the only funding source for most programs that we fund. And so what it comes down to is which dollars can pay for which kids, okay? So it's not as if the child has necessarily refused service, because we're not the entire funder for a program in almost 100% of the cases.
Mm-hmm. I would like to see, because it's not a huge number of kids, I would like to see language that includes kids that are in some other kind of government custody, or however, whatever terms we need to use to capture kids that, as he said, in the Oregon Youth Authority and in the juvenile.
So using the term of ward of the court.
Ward of the court.
Would then encompass, for example, Oregon Youth Authority. I'm not sure about the federal, those eligible through federal programs, or that language, or those special courts.
Mm-hmm.
Whether that may be a different, that too may be a different subsection that we.
Would you be willing to have us work with these folks who are the ones who have the issue with around the language for the types of situations in which a youth is in some kind of substitute care? They are not with their family. Mm-hmm. What do you think about that?
Well, for me, because we're on such a short time frame, I would like to keep it as is for right now, and just kind of look at it a little bit more closely as we move forward. But since we're on a time crunch, because if that's the case, I'd want to do a little bit more research on it. But I know we're in a time crunch to get these out by the 16th.
We could run the proposed language by you all via email and just ask if there's objections to it.
Okay.
Does that
Are folks
meet
comfortable with that?
people's?
Yeah, it sounds like what we're heading to is formal, not informal. So award of the court released to a uncle would or would not be formal. I mean, I guess that's the question, because it seems to me, all I know is what I've heard, so I'm dangerous.
One of the things that, that I hesitate a little bit with expanding this definition is that the way we have it set up right now, each of the programs sends in a participant list that identifies the DHS case number that is associated with the child. And DHS does a check to confirm, yes, this child was in foster care, sub-care on the date that they were enrolled. So if we expand to these other, opening it up more to these other systems, I don't have a system in place or a way to be able to confirm that. In these situations where there have been exceptions made or where it's tribal custody, the programs are asked to have documentation on file that does confirm that they indeed were in sub-care or a placement. But I don't, that needs to be available if we were to do an audit of that information. But there's not a systematic way to check that. So that's one thing that I think is important for.
What if we just articulated that there can be exceptions, so it's, foster care is
This is how it's defined.
it's defined this way, and, other iterations may be approved, by exception, by staff.
That feels comfortable.
Yeah.
Because there have been
comfortable
so
with that,
few
yeah.
cases of it. I just am a little hesitant to expand it. That feels-
We can write that language in, and then run that by you guys, by email. Does that work?
Yes.
Being announced. Did you have something else to say?
No.
I
I guess my thing is, I just want to make sure that we're able to track kids, and with DHS, and like you were saying, that's usually the easiest way to do it. And when you're going through audit and you're going back and doing audits and looking at where these kids are coming from, to be able to track where they're coming from and what's happening with them, and be able to follow them through. I guess that's my biggest thing. And that's where going to this, looking at a lot of these things and where these kids are and what their needs are as they're aging out or whether they're in, is to have an appropriate way to track them. So and I'm fine with staying on an as needed or an approval basis. That works really great for me.
And that assures that the numbers will be kept relatively small.
Right.
So we will be tracking in our kind of traditional way to make sure we're serving that population the way we've done in the past. So I think that would give you that kind of assurance that we're checking those kids regularly, make sure we are trying to get to the population that's in sub-care, which was kind of the original intent, I think.
Right.
So that's where that checking is important, I think. Okay, so with that modification, you want to do the routine?
Do our little thing. Can I get a motion to approve with the modification that we discussed?
So moved.
The approval of the foster care RFI with modification as discussed has been moved and seconded. All in favor, vote aye. Aye. Opposed? The RFI for foster care is approved. And mentoring is up.
Okay, so mentoring. A few more changes on this one. Most of the changes are about incorporating the best practices that that Oregon Mentors uses for quality assurance, and so that requires asking some additional questions. So I'll run through some of the additions that we made. So again, we added definitions. We defined intensive to be at least 4 hours per month of service, but noting that's a priority, not a requirement. So that's a definition to make clear what we're talking about, but it isn't necessarily required. So we can entertain applications from folks who do less intensive services. We clarified the strategy focus. Proposals have to include the strategy. So the strategy in this area is supports for student academic achievement or post-secondary pursuits. So anybody who proposes has to at least include that strategy, and it has to be an intentional focus of the program, but it also can have other foci, I guess that's a word, and have other intents and purposes as well. Youth development, it can have relationship basis, other, these are all keys to often providing successful academic support, but there may be other elements of the program besides that. We defined the minimum duration, which was the same as in the last RFI, which is at least 1 school year for a match, and preferably longer. We incorporated best practice standards around, and this is all in the proof and program design section, so these are added questions to that section that look at mentor recruitment, the outreach you do to get mentors, mentor screening and enrollment, which is a whole process, and background checking, the matching process where you match the mentor with the mentees, and then the mentor support, whatever supports and training you offer to the mentors. So there's an added dimension in this program area because you're not just dealing with your client, you're also dealing with, for many programs, either it's mostly volunteer mentors. In some cases, they're paid or otherwise supported. So those are all added into the proven program section, and that required that we adjust some of the point values in those subsections in the rubric that or I should say in the scoring form that we showed you last time. For mentoring, we had to play around with those to attend to the fact that we had changed the questions and had more questions in some sections and had to up the point values for those. So that's there's no change to the overall distribution of point values amongst the questions. It's just within the subsections. So that's really the sum total of the changes, and that was the whole reason really was around making sure we incorporated those standards, which is something that we did in the last time. This isn't really new. We asked those questions in the last RFI. It's just that they not in the template because they don't apply to anybody but mentors. So that's kind of a summary. Questions?
Any questions? No?
No?
Okay.
Okay.
Is there anyone who would like to comment on the mentoring RFI? Anyone? Okay. There's no public comment, so could I get a motion to approve the mentoring RFI? The motion to approve the mentoring RFI has been moved and seconded. All in favor, vote aye. Aye. Opposed? The mentoring RFI is approved. And last but not least,
Yes. Hunger
relief.
Yes. This one required the most change because these services are the most fundamentally different from the others that we have funded in the past. So we had to try to monkey around to make it apply for the kinds of things that we put in the strategies. So the strategies, again, just to refresh your memory, are to increase access to and utilization of existing hunger relief programs, school-based food pantries, increasing access to food during the summer and other out-of-school time, and alternative approaches to hunger relief and to increasing the nutritional value of the food that we do provide. So in order to make this work for the way that people count things in hunger relief programs, which is a different way than people in social services often count things, we had to change some of the questions that we asked. So first we were allowing people to use duplicated and unduplicated numbers, which is probably more technical than people want to get into, but if you have questions, I'm happy to answer. We provided guidance for how they might estimate demographics because many people do hunger relief services and they're not asking people to fill out forms when they come to pick up a food box. So you have to find other ways to estimate who you're actually reaching with your relief services. So we provided some guidance and added some thoughts on that. We increased the point value for outreach and engagement in this area. We doubled it from 5 to 10 points, so it's significant. That's why I'm mentioning it. And that was because this whole strategy is significantly about increasing access. So how we do outreach, how we engage people, how we bring them in is going to be very key, and it's probably going to be different amongst those strategies. So we want to make sure that people really spell that out and talk thoroughly about it, and we want to raise the point value for it. So that was a key change. In the program activities chart, where one of the ways you can count in this area is you count food, not people. So people count the number of meals they provide, and they count the number of food boxes they provide, or they might count the pounds of food that they generate, fresh food or produce. So we are allowing that method as a way of showing what your projections are for what you're going to serve. We took out all the references in the rest of the application, so the others, those are the next 3 questions, the next 3 sections of the program section. All the references to participation and to outcomes have been taken out because the outcome that we want here is for people not to be hungry, and that's kind of consistent across all of this effort, right? It's not the same in all the rest of our programs. We have many, many, many outcomes that we want from people, and there are many ways to measure them. Similarly, for participation, we want people to come, obviously, we want people to, so that's all, but that's all captured in your service data. So they're going to tell me they want to serve 100 meals over the summer in this set of circumstances, they'll be able to report on whether they did that. There's no participation level the way it would be, say, if you're taking an after-school class where we want to understand, well, is the child coming regularly to get the academic support so we understand whether they're going to make any difference on their academics. That's not really the same here. We want to track the meals that were given. We can assume somebody came and they ate them and they were less hungry afterwards. So we don't really need to track participation in those same ways. So all that stuff was removed, and instead we added questions that really are just all about the service data. How do you track it? What have you done in the past? Can you show us how you got to the numbers that you're projecting you'll do for us and under this program? And does that all make sense? So that was the basic gist of all those changes. And then the last is we jimmied some of the point values to account for that. So we moved things around between the subsections. Where we subtracted questions, we subtracted points. Where we added questions or collapsed questions, we kept the points the same or transferred them to the outreach section. So that was kind of the basic theory there. And I'm happy to take any questions on it because I know that's a little bit confusing. This was the most radical redraw of the applications. And I don't know if folks in the hunger community have any thoughts about it. I'd be happy to hear that as well. So,
Any questions?
Go ahead.
Well, my question actually is, I'm curious because we had a little bit of a conversation back when we, put this together a few months ago, around nutrition and nutrition education. And I'm curious to know, as part of the evaluation, how will we know what will we know about the actual nutritional value about the food?
So you mean
Be able to track that.
Well, those are the two things maybe. So there's nutritional value of the food and whether you've increased it, right? That would be one thing. So in other words, did you change the food that was being offered or somehow, or offer different or better food than what had been offered in the past? That might be one thing. The other thing might be an education program that's around nutrition, which might involve classes and those kinds of things. And I think you're right. You can track outcomes on that part of the program because that's a sort of a sub-strategy within, and it was encouraged but not required. We figured that it probably made more sense just in terms of the complexity of what you have to write in the application to work with grantees who are going to do that on the back end to set up some kind of outcome tracking for that, rather than asking it to be specified here, because the primary thrust of all of the programming that we're asking for is hunger relief, and that would be appurtenant too. So whatever anybody did around nutrition programming, it would be in the context of also doing hunger relief, and they would be tracking the numbers and the stuff that goes into that first and foremost, and this would be another piece of that programming. And to have to keep all that stuff in the application for the people who are going to offer that program component makes it very complicated, and it's not going to apply to everybody, which means that you'd have to score it differently based on what strategies were put forth. So in the end, we decided that the basic thrust was around hunger relief, and let's track and make sure that everyone is telling us how they're going to do that. And then if there are people who come forward to offer nutrition education programming as a part of what they're doing, that we will work with them to figure out what their participation outcomes look like. So we would ask for data on the back end, but I'm not asking for it in the application, if that makes sense.
Part of what I'm hearing you say, though, is maybe around what the quality, like how do we measure the quality of the food that's being distributed to kids? Is that
That part of the nutrition part, having nothing to do with nutrition education, but the actual.
And what you mean is you'd want to track that for everybody, or you want people to talk about that in the application, how they measure that, or?
Well, I think it's raised in the application. It seems that there's.
It's part of that last strategy.
Right, it was part of the strategy. So, one would assume that that whatever food is being provided, that the quality, it doesn't change over if there are budgetary issues suddenly, like, okay, we can't serve as many servings of this, we'll backfill with more of this, which is perhaps less nutritious, that sort of thing. It's just really sort of a quality control part of it. I'm I don't have an answer for you, certainly, but I'm just curious whether there's any expectation of how we need to be aware of that and be responsible for whether that is, how that is being fulfilled.
Well, it's a good question. I don't really have a great answer for you, to be honest. I mean, I think that some of what we want people to do is increase access to existing programming that has nutrition standards. Okay, so being able to run anything through USDA, there's all the nutrition standards that apply through USDA. So that, I don't know that we would need to check on that per se, because they would need to adhere to that in order to participate in that federal program, if that makes sense. So WIC and the after-school suppers and snacks program, the SNAP program, I mean, anybody who's getting people to enroll in that or somehow allowing better access to that is going to have to give that at that. So then you're talking about other types of emergency food, like food boxes or food pantries at schools, or some other method that folks might have for getting food that they're then delivering through those mechanisms. So I'm not sure what would you want people to, what would you want to ask in the application? I guess if you're thinking about modifying the language, what would you want to ask about? That they talk about the nutritional value of the food that they're giving out? Is that what you're getting at, or?
Certainly, it seems like it would, and what I'm hearing you say is that already we would have a sense of that this is, if they're involved with USDA, for example, or not, that kind of information. So that we do have an ability to recognize what their plan is for around nutritious meals.
So maybe sort of asking, you think about adding a question for those people to discuss how they look at the nutritional value of the food that they provide, something like that, maybe?
I would like to know kind of, if two organizations are proposing to feed the same number of people, is one providing, fresh fruits and vegetables in addition to, just some way to measure the quality per meal so that when we're evaluating applications, we can choose the one that has, the most bang for the buck, but also the highest quality.
Okay.
I'm just sort of thinking out loud, but I mean, thinking about getting applications and being able to judge. I mean, there's minimum standards, and then there's how do we judge if there's a proposal that is more robust and has better, higher, or an organic standard or something else.
I mean, the best I can do is I could say I could go back and look and figure out in what context would it make sense to ask that question. Maybe as part of the program design section where we ask something about, to ask them to describe how they look at the quality of the meal that they provide, or the meals that they provide, and by what standards do they judge it. Does that make sense? Something along those lines?
I think that would be helpful.
Because then you would have the information, and then you could, that would be one of the things that would go into you weighing about who you want to fund.
I mean, one of the things that we had talked about, again, 2 or 3 months ago, was when we decided not to have nutrition education as a priority, or we took that out. I mean, there was a suggestion made that that should be a part of programs. We took that out in part believing that to some extent nutrition education should be inherent in this, that if people are being served good food, doesn't have to be the highest quality, but what they are being served is also an education opportunity. And so just wondering whether, but we haven't really talked about what those meals look like. And I don't want to burden organizations with needing to do intensive reporting.
Menus.
Yes, we don't need a 10-day sample menu.
Right, well, there's asking a question in an application, and then there's reporting, and those are two different things. So, I just keep that in mind. There's nothing wrong with asking, a question about it. I'm not saying that we're going to I'm going to ask people to track something about nutritional content of food and report that to us. I mean, those are two different things. So I think, why don't also I think you should see if anybody in the hunger community wants to offer any thoughts about this, but at least preliminarily, I could say we go back and look and see how we might ask a question about that so that you would get some information about it in the application.
I mean, being this is a new area, if there's something that we can be doing around that now and begin to, I don't want to use the word experiment, that's not right, but begin to develop those protocols, it might have value for us then as we go forward.
mean, keeping in mind one thing, I just want to make clear, the nutrition education is still part of the strategies. It's still, it's encouraged.
But
So it's not a priority, but it's
required threat.
encouraged.
That was it.
So it hasn't been erased. Serena, did you have a question too? I'm fine. No? Oh, okay. Other questions or discussion before we see if folks want to comment?
Or is there someone from the food area here that can shed some light?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if there's anyone who wants to come up and talk.
Would anyone
about
like
it.
to comment? Come on up.
Come on up. Enlighten us. Help us.
Hi, I'm Frances Hall in Neighborhood House, and I'm certainly not an expert in the hunger world, but we do run a school-based food pantry and also a community-based pantry. And I would say, speaking to the strategies that are here, we don't have a lot of control about the actual quality of the food. We certainly have some leeway, but if, for instance, you're talking about expanding food during the summer or those sorts of things, the school districts could be the ones delivering the food to us if it was a sun site or something like that. So I don't know what kind of proposals will come in because the sky is kind of the limit in this new area. But it is sometimes the case where the food bank has set really great standards already for the kinds and the quality of food that are coming to our sites for those pantries. So for those of us who have run those programs, we certainly strive for the best quality possible and the most amount of fruits and vegetables, but sometimes we just are getting what we get for summer feeding and that sort of thing. Again, I don't know what kind of applications will come in, but for some of those setup programs, we're getting things from other parties.
It's helpful to know.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Would anyone else like to make any comments? Come on up. And while she's talking, if anyone else decides they want to come up, just come on up to the table.
Hi, I'm Erin Cunningham with the Boys and Girls Club, and we do after school and summer feeding, and we serve about 150,000 meals annually. And so I think that the question that you might be looking for in the application process is how do you decide on the nutrition standards that a program serves? So for instance, we work with USDA for our minimum standards, like you mentioned, but then we also have a process or policies in place that that talk about higher standards or above that minimum, or for any meals that aren't served through USDA, what is our process for figuring out the nutritional value and what are our minimum standards? And so that might be what you're looking for as far as what are your internal processes or policies in regards to finding out what is the minimum standard of a nutritional meal that you would serve if you're talking about meals versus food boxes or something like that.
Thank you. It's really helpful. Anyone else? Okay.
So it sounds like we could find some way to ask that question, and I could run it by you all.
Great.
Okay. So looking at nutritional standards and nutritional quality is what I'm hearing. Yeah.
It'll come through in those reports that we'll get.
I'm sorry?
Sounds like it'll come through in those reports that we'll get, too.
Well, yeah, I mean, we can ask whatever we want in the report. I mean, we're going to design the reports. They haven't been designed yet because it's a new area, so we could ask whatever we all want to know, and whatever we feel is reasonable to burden people with. But I think in the question, this is sort of a different issue of understanding up front kind of what are people's standards. And I think that's a good question and one that we really overlooked. So I'm really glad you raised that. Thank you. And we will put some language in there, and then you guys can see what you think, and just do it. I think it's probably easier just to wordsmith it online and go from there.
Sounds great.
Does that make sense?
Okay. Can I get a motion to approve the hunger relief RFE as modified as discussed?
A motion.
Thank you. Second? Okay. Approval of the hunger relief RFI has been moved and seconded. All in favor, vote aye. Aye. Opposed? Hunger relief RFI has been approved. All right.
All right. We will have those modified ones out to you shortly. Thank you, guys.
And I do want to thank staff for, I mean, it made it, you really clearly worked very hard on preparing these RFIs, all of those. And the fact that there were not a lot of questions from either us or the public, I think really speaks to the thoroughness with which you did your work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other comments from the committee? Okay. I'd like to thank you too. This went really smoothly. I'd like to thank everybody who came and listened and provided input. We don't anticipate meeting again until the late spring, but meanwhile, Levy staff will be busy with all of the massive details involved in the RFI process, including poring over the RFIs, convening readers groups who will do the same, and I'm sure answering many, many questions from applicants and other interested parties. As there will be a lot going on that RFI applicants will want to stay informed about, you'll be receiving regular updates and reminders from staff. And don't forget to keep checking the PCL website as well at portlandchildrenslevy.org and the Levy Facebook page. So with that, unless there are any further comments, we are adjourned.
Two bidders conferences everyone know about. Thursday, January 23rd from 1 to 2:30 at the North Portland Library, and Thursday, January